welcome everyone to Sport Tech Daily's episode with James Day. He's got a PhD in neuromechanics and also worked at Fusion Sport for almost a decade now. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. As always, we're going to start off with yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I've got a pretty interesting background, I guess. So I started off studying human movement studies at UQ. I actually did a dual degree with business management as well. Out of that, I sort of got some prac work towards the end of that at Fusion Sport, doing a range of different things. But that sort of led on to me getting a casual job as a sports science consultant with them. That was in kind of a new area at the time, a new product they had, which is called SmarterBase, but is fundamentally an athlete management system, which was pretty new back at the time. This was sort of around 2010. But at the same time, I had also sort of developed this interest in biomechanics and had been doing some work in the biomechanics lab at UQ, and so yeah, through that process, I had also decided that I was going to do a PhD. So I sort of picked these two fairly different paths, but started them both at the same time. Right. And they managed to work quite well together. Initially, it was sort of, you know, the casual work with Fusion Sport, where I was consulting to a lot of clients who were starting off with this new software. Didn't take up too much time, and I used it to sort of supplement my my income during the PhD, and so that was sort of a pretty good win for me. But eventually, that became a bit of a challenge when Fusion landed a big contract with the Australian Sports Commission, right, to basically roll out this athlete management system software to the whole sports commission. So the AIS, all of the state institutes, all of the national sporting organizations, Swimming Australia, Athletics Australia, etc. And so I sort of had put my hand up to be involved in that, but that was going to be a full-time role. So at that point, I stepped back to a part-time PhD, which had essentially put it on hold, and was involved in that project for about 18 months before I realized that I was never going to finish a PhD if I kept doing it, and so then flipped back in the other direction, and went back and finished my PhD in the biomechanics area, and when that finished, I landed the full-time job with Fusion.
Yeah, nice. Okay, and tell us a bit more about your, I guess, area of research with your PhD.
Yeah, so it was as you mentioned, it was an area sort of broadly called neuromechanics. It wasn't particularly sports related. It was sort of considered a basic science PhD. So we were trying to understand some of the fundamental pathways involved in balance and postural control. So looking at it sort of from a biomechanics standpoint, but also then integrating some theories of motor control and sort of the interface between the nervous system and the muscular system, and how those different pathways were involved in controlling upright stance. So yeah, I mean, specifically we looked at like a very specific, unique muscle in the front of the leg, and you know, you get very detailed on this one very little area in a PhD, but that's sort of the I guess the broad stroke of it.
Cool. All right. And look, you've spent almost a decade working in several capacities over at Fusion Sport. Can you tell us what you've been doing more recently since you've been full-time there?
Yeah, so I transitioned, I guess, from a sports science consultant into more of a research and development role when I finished my PhD. So I started off working mostly in an area that we developed called the research and analytics team. Originally, it was just myself, and I would do a lot of bespoke analytics work for our clients who were using our software. So less of a focus on helping them implement various various aspects of the software and sort of sports science theory, and more on helping them visualize and understand their data a bit more.
Right.
Since then, I've moved into more of a project manager role, and my official title at Fusion is now Senior Project Manager. And most recently, I've been, I guess, the product owner, product manager of a new application that we've developed that we roll out to all our clients, and it's the mobile application that their athletes use to interface with our software.
Wow. All right. Okay. And I love hearing about, I guess, people like yourself and your background in terms of transitioning from university and a PhD to, the, I guess, more high performance or commercial land. So can you tell us a little bit about that transition and the change of pace?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's very different. There's a lot of similarities, but it is a very different world. Being in the industry is a lot more fast-paced. Obviously, I think one of the key differences I found is in academia, you have the time, but also the remit to kind of search for the ground truths and spend time sort of at the edges of knowledge, looking for what is the actual answer here. Whereas in industry, you often just don't have the time to get into that level of detail, and more commonly, actually, like, the perfect solution is not the best solution, because you kind of can't know that ahead of time. So what we focus a lot more in industry is sort of trying to be, use a buzzword here, trying to be more agile, where you can get to a pretty good solution in a relatively efficient manner, and then from there start collecting feedback and iterating and moving in the right direction from there. So you can sort of get to the right place and then start to tinker at the margins. Whereas academia, I think, is a lot more about being in those margins and thinking about them from the start. I think one of the things I learned a lot about in my PhD that has transitioned really well has been sort of project management and time management, task management. Sort of fundamentally, as a PhD student, you are a project manager, and you've sort of got this 3 to 5 year project that you have to complete, and you're the only person working on it in some situations. And so I learned a lot about that, which has transitioned across really nicely for my work at Fusion.
Right, excellent. And look, you're also involved with the AFL, data analytics community. What are some of the things that you've, I guess, managed to achieve with them?
Yeah, so that was something that I guess also came out of my PhD. I developed this really big interest in sort of programming and sort of coding and doing data analysis in various areas. So I used MATLAB a lot in my PhD, but sort of developed an interest in R as well. And when I got into my role at Fusion, a lot of the work I was doing wasn't particularly utilizing those skills. So I sort of became a bit mindful of the fact that I didn't want to lose those skills, and sort of wanted to develop I guess, an outlet for continuing my development in that area. And so picked up this idea of sort of doing a blog in the AFL world. I think at the time I was reading a lot of 538 stuff and was really obsessed with that, and so I sort of had this vision of becoming the 538 blog for Australia kind of thing, and doing all these really interesting sort of data-driven articles and research in the kind of sports and politics and entertainment area. But picked AFL as my target because it's something I really enjoy, and I played AFL, like watching it. So started that blog pretty much straight out of the PhD, and sort of quickly started to learn a lot about R and blog down, and managed to get the site up and running pretty quickly, and sort of soon realized that that one of the big constraints of my vision of becoming this 538 was that it took so long to get the data, scrape the data, process it, to even get it to a point where I could start, telling an interesting story or producing an interesting visualization. And so from there, I guess the idea of developing a package in R that would sort of wrap up a lot of the common functions that I was doing, a lot of the different scraping and cleaning and data munging and processing into this package that could then be reused and sort of utilized it, and sort of take out that time constraint that I was having. So from there, the package itself is called Fitzroy, that I developed with Rob Ewan, and yeah, we got that published, and we've got a paper written about it as well. And it's used pretty widely. I was talking to someone recently who said they know that most AFL clubs are using it internally as well, which is kind of cool to know.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, sorry, on the topic of engaging a technical skill. So you've had your PhD, your work at Fusion Sport, and your work with your blog and your sort of AFL analytics. Can you tell us, in terms of technical skills and modeling analysis methods, like what are the things that you end up using most often during all three aspects of your work?
Yeah, so I think in my PhD it was predominantly MATLAB. That was sort of the predominant language used in the biomechanics world. There's a lot of sort of open source toolkits and biomechanical modeling that's done in MATLAB. So that's kind of where I had started. But towards the end of the PhD, started learning R to do some of my actual analysis, and that's where most of my time is now spent. So I think one of the nice things about doing the package is I've learnt a lot more about just sort of general programming and what's involved in sort of making a package that you probably don't learn when you're doing just general data analysis. So things like designing functions, optimization of your code, writing unit tests, all those kind of things that if you had to ask me at the start if I'd be interested in that, I would definitely say no. But it's certainly been an area that's been really cool to pick up and learn. In terms of then the actual, like in the blog, what I do with the actual analytics side of things, most of my work has just been in developing an ELO model, which is a fairly basic one. It's sort of, ironically, having created the package with the dream of then spending all this time doing more data analysis, it's actually gone the opposite direction. And I spend less time on the blog now than I did before having the package. But
Fair enough. Okay. And look, for people that are sport tech enthusiasts, so whether they're sporting fans looking to pick up sort of basic data science and analytics skills, or people that are maybe software developers by trade, for example, that are looking to get into the sporting side, because there's obviously a lot of untapped potential. What advice would you have for someone that's trying to get started?
It's interesting. I think just getting involved in the community is a really good starting point. And there's obviously what you're trying to create here is a really good start. But even just getting on Twitter, and there's lots of great people on there, and it's really open and friendly environment, particularly in the AFL area. But I think in Australia, sports analytics is still fairly immature. So I think there's a lot of people who are getting involved and all just sort of willing to bring everyone up at the same time. So I'd say that's a fairly good starting point. And I think from there, like, various opportunities will start to open up, and there might be some cool collaborations or those kind of things that come out of it. And outside of that, my best advice is just to create some kind of project with a goal what you want to achieve, whether that's a blog or whether that's to get it out there and get feedback, get it into the community. And I think there'll be lots of opportunities open up for people in that way.
Right. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess you alluded to this at the start, when you were talking about your journey in terms of the blog and how much time it took for you just in terms of data processing. If you could give advice to, the James of say 4 years ago, what would be, I guess, the number one thing in terms of saving a lot of time on that?
Yeah, it is interesting because I think one of the things you start to learn when you get into the weeds with programming, and particularly I've found this with the packages, that I'll spend 3 days optimizing something that might save 1 second in the actual in the actual package, and it seems like it's really important, but maybe it would be not to worry so much about some of those things.
Right.
But yeah, I think for me, just stressing the importance of getting good data and being able to get data easily, and how important that is, and not try and focus too much on the end goal until you've got that sorted. I think, even if I think about sort of my work life with Fusion, one of our goals is to allow people to have all of their data in one place and in a good format, and not have it sort of siloed in different places. And I still think that is sort of the biggest area of opportunity in sport at the moment, is making sure that the data itself is good before we go too far down the line of implementing advanced machine learning models or anything like that.
Right. Okay. And look, in terms of the sport tech space overall in Australia, we were talking just off air. There's the sports science and the sort of PhDs. In this environment, there's the tech startups. There's sort of betting and fantasy. There's the sport analytics Twitter community. There's a lot of different people within this space in Australia. What would you recommend in terms of a couple of your favorite resources, whether it be like a podcast or a blog or like a Twitter handle, something on YouTube maybe, in terms of people getting started and getting a really good big picture understanding of this environment in Australia?
Yeah, cool. I think I'll give my friend Rob a bit of a plug. So Rob, who I wrote the package with, has got a really good podcast. Yeah. It's called Chilling with Charlie, which I think Charlie is his dog. You can probably see my dog in the background as well. Yeah. He's stuck in the room, wants to get outside. But that's really good. He's got some really good guests on that, and he does a lot actually. I'm gonna ask him how he manages to get so many interviews done. That would be a good starting point. The other areas for me, like, are fairly focused in the AFL area, but Tony from Matter of Stats was sort of a fairly big inspiration of mine, and he's for people who want to get into the really technical side of things, he's a fantastic technical writer, and also very responsive and open on Twitter. So those would be good places. That there are also a lot of various, as you mentioned, there's a lot of various various communities in the different kind of siloed areas. So there's some really good sports technology groups. There's some interesting sports analytics groups. I'm not so involved in the fantasy side of things, but that's obviously a fairly huge aspect as well. So I think there's certainly plenty of different areas around, depending on what people are interested in.
Yep, awesome. And how about yourself? What's your sort of favorite sporting team, etc.?
I'm a huge AFL fan and a big Hawthorn fan. I've been Hawthorn all my life, so I managed to get to a few grand finals, and which has been good.
I winced a little bit because I'm a Sydney Swans fan, and the one grand final I've physically been to was, I forgot what year. I think it was 2014 or 15, the one where the Swans got smashed. So always nice to hear that.
Yeah, well, I went to the one that you guys beat us in as well. So
nice. That feels a bit better.
There's some payback.
Right, awesome. Well, look, the reason I asked that is the way I'd love to finish off is if you could think of a sporting team or a player that you could work with on a specific problem of theirs with your sort of technical skill set and knowledge, who would it be and what would you help them with?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, Hawthorn would be great.
I don't think they need your help.
yeah, exactly. um, it, yeah, I would say. I mean, I would say being in the sports industry and working with a lot of different teams, like most of the clients or most of the common things that people want to be solving is around injury prediction. I think it's kind of a holy grail in the sports area. I'm not at the moment convinced that it's a solvable problem with the data that we have. That's a very contentious area, so I won't get too much into that, but there's certainly different schools of thought around that. So yeah, I'd probably stick away from that as like a dream problem. I think it's a bit too controversial.
Right.
But yeah, I think sort of bigger picture, I think there's lots of opportunities for kind of optimization in sport. So combining data sources from different areas, like vision is not one that's really done a lot. Automated detection of events through vision, and combining that with things like GPS and stats and sort of even just general biological data from the players and using that to create some kind of holistic model that that kind of allows you to I guess whether that would be run some simulations to try out different game plans, or whether that's looking at trades or development of players or something. And
Right.
I think there's some really good opportunities for combining data from lots of different sources to sort of get a really good picture and then potentially run some different, whether that's simulations or scenario analysis or something.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that, obviously the sort of downtime that we've got in sport at the moment might open up people to, obviously a lot more innovation. But I guess the NFL and all the sporting codes in Australia and the world have a lot more on their plate than thinking about these things at the moment. But look, fingers crossed, right?
Yeah, and it is interesting being in this space during this time, because I think it highlights to a lot of people the importance of technology in these kind of in these times, and being able to understand things about your athletes or your teams or your organizations when you can't sort of be there to physically observe them is really important. So
yeah, awesome. All right. Well, look, it was super interesting. I really appreciate you opening up about all the different aspects of, I guess, your involvement with sport in Australia. And definitely really interesting having a chat with you. Thanks for your time, James.
Awesome. Thanks heaps.
Excellent. Cheers.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to check out more of our content, go to sporttechdaily.com or follow us on social media across Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram.